there. So now we are honored to have Peter Rollins with us here today, and we'll first discuss religion and psychoanalysis with him, and then we'll proceed to discuss it with the rest of us. And I know that with Peter Rollins, we are both agree, like we have similar type of thinking on religion and psychoanalysis, but we also have differences in our thinking, because, for example, I think I have less hope in both psychoanalysis and religion. For Peter, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you see psychoanalysis as a practice of death of God, and you trust Freud more than I do trust Freud, because I still think that I think that I'm inventing psychoanalysis as this practice, not Freud. And you claim that it's already existed in Freud. And I also have less hope for religion. Like for me, what you do, you try to subvert religion from inside, and I try to subvert psychoanalysis from inside, depriving both. So what you probably do is deprive church from hope of salvation, and I try to deprive psychoanalysis from hope of salvation in a form of therapy, but maybe subverting therapy as such. So we are different, but we are similar at the same time. Do you
Absolutely.
agree?
Yes, no, I think that structurally we're doing something very analogous. One of the things that I'm interested in, religion, very traditionally, the definition of God Anselm gives is God as a signifier for something that cannot be signified. So, even in traditional confessional theology, this signifier God signifies a type of lack, a type of, in the terms of the mystics, it's a hyper presence, but it is something that is beyond being. And my work is about, in a sense, seeing the signifier God as a signifier for lack, that at the very core of religion, there is nothing. There is this lack, and that we have to come to terms with it. We can't overcome it. And I think structurally very similar, obviously, to what you're doing, and the part of Freud that you actually do like, that the kind of beyond the pleasure principle, Freud, of the death drive. So I would love to ask you a few questions and then see where it goes from there. Oh yeah, and there's an article that I've actually just finished writing, and I think that Julie, you and I might discuss it in a later one like this. Actually, Julie said that if it was finished in time, we would have discussed it on this one, so maybe we can do that next month. But it's called The Profane Temple, and in that article, I basically argue three things: nothing lives, nothing binds, and nothing saves. So the last one might be the most controversial one for Julie. But with nothing lives, that's the idea that this lack is something that doesn't lie ahead of us or is something we can avoid, is actually something within us. The good news is we don't have to fear death because we already are dead. We just don't know it. And we have to, in a way, the challenge is to signify that lack. Nothing binds, very, very similar to Julie's work, which is this lack is what creates a social bond, what unifies us, and that's in this article where you talk about that. And then nothing saves, which is, but it's a salvation from salvation. For me, the idea that as we make space for this lack, it can have a transformative effect, and we can build a collective, and we can build a political project on this. But okay, but to start with, when I'm reading the article, I want to see if you agree with this distinction that I'm going to make. Broadly speaking, I'm going to talk about the priest and the psychoanalyst, right? And I want to talk about the traumas that happen to the subject and the trauma that is the subject. The thing about psychoanalysis in a very practical way is I think it's primarily involved at first with the traumas that happen to the subject. So you go to psychoanalysis for particular reasons. for particular symptoms that are unique to you. And I'm going to say the priest, and by the priest, I mean the radical priest, not the confessional priest. They are primarily interested in the trauma that is the subject. And I think these link and these connect. But the thing that I'm interested in is when someone goes to psychoanalysis, often they're going because, for example, they find that they can't have sex with the person they love, or they can't have sex at all, or they can't leave the house, or they have visions of something, or they are profoundly self-critical and they have like these voices that are all telling them they're worthless or something. So they have these very, very particular symptoms. And I kind of want to say psychoanalysis is helpful for that. Right? That's what I want to say. It's almost like if, for example, you find yourself only being able to have sexual feelings for people that you don't know and no sexual feelings for your partner, right? That's a very practical type of suffering. And I would say, and again, I want to hear from you, but I go like, that's not enough just for us to see each other suffering. There's something that can be worked through and overcome there. However, you can't overcome the trauma that is the subject. And where I think your work and my work align is we're primarily interested in the latter, primarily interested in creating a collective in which people um, confront the trauma that they are without anybody looking away. But I still hold this place for if someone comes to say one of my churches, right? And they have psychotic symptoms, I'll be like, go and see a psychoanalyst. This will not be enough. This is where you encounter the trauma that is the subject, but you have individual traumas from basically having an absent father, being too close to the mother, in unstable family environment, et cetera, et cetera. And that I kind of want to say can be alleviated, but it doesn't alleviate the suffering that we are. So anyway, what about that distinction? Do you like or dislike? And do you think that psychoanalysis has value in terms of say the traumas that happen to us, as opposed to the trauma that is us?
Yeah, I would agree and disagree at the same time, because normal psychoanalytic distinction, this way of dealing with the universal trauma and individual trauma, they would claim that, and I would agree with that, that any individualized trauma, like any problem, particular problem that defines you as individual and that psychoanalysis and psychotherapy promises to fix, it's still a reminder of universal traumas, like particular instance. And if normal psychotherapy would operate by promising that there is an issue and we can fix this issue, I would rather show somehow this link of like it's even worse. This is horrible what you're going through, but like that's even worse. And this is what I'm developing in something I'm writing, trying to finish right now, and talking about trauma of Ukrainian widows. Try to develop concept of trauma knowledge, as seeing trauma as knowledge, meaning that it open up something. It's not in depression in a similar way, that it's not only something wrong, something went wrong with the person, but it's also universal experience that opens up a certain type of knowledge about existence. And any tiny thing that is individual trauma, like not tiny, but it's substantial and huge, but like individual trauma, particular trauma, for example, of loss of husband, or trauma that someone was cheated on. It's also simultaneously, we would like to limit it to this particular problem that can be fixed, and everything is going to be all right. That's the problem you located. But the opposite process is related. The horror of particular trauma is that it's open up a knowledge about everything else. Like the death of husband, it means not only that husband died and now I'm horrified, but also the knowledge about the world where this can happen, where this happened before to other people, where it will happen in the future. There is nothing you can do with it. How horrible it is. Like, it's quite universal knowledge about everything else at the same time. And knowledge one cannot live with. It's so horrible. And one cannot trust existence, so to say, anymore. Like, it's much more than just knowledge of the particular issue. And therapeutic effect of psychotherapy is that it gives hope that you can localize the suffering in a tiny trauma of your particular something that happened to you, without this seeing it as existential revelation. And this existential revelation, negative one, would be stigmatized, like you sick, you too depressed to think properly. And I think it's the opposite. But I would also claim that it might help, it might give illusion of help, the ability to deal with the just localizing it, have preserving a hope that it's possible to localize it. Like, it's not revelation about everything else. It's small, it's localizable. But I also think, and this is where I'm different from Zizek, for example, and like thinking about salvation and all of this theology and religion, because Zizek and those people who, critical theorists who criticize the positive therapeutic society, which I do also, but Zizek at the same time, what his criticism of injunction to enjoy represents, and he would refer to the idea of Nietzsche's idea of last man a lot, comparing contemporary people who don't want pain, who probably those people who go to therapy and who just want to live their little lives with having little pleasures for day and little pleasures for night. Like, he would be judgmental, claiming that, we need to be someone, you need to be someone better than this. I think that even if we are this last man, I don't think it's people who are pursuing a pleasure, like horrible people. I just think that this and psychotherapy that tries to help them in this, it's just a way of sustain trauma. It's still a knowledge of trauma. It's still being horrified. It's still a death of God, so to say. It's just different form to deal with it. Unlike we have this form of, okay, this is universal knowledge, how everything is horrible, we'll discuss it and feel cooler than they are. I think it's the same way, similar way pathetic than what people do. We both know we're horrified. It's just this trauma response, a way of coping with this trauma of a death of God, depression is different. So we are not better than last man, we are. It's like there is no way that one can do a proper thing right now. We're just all doing our thing in various ways.
Yeah, so I mean, this, and I love that. I agree with that. But in some respects, it sounds like what you're offering are the people who might, for want of a better word, well, kind of gravitate towards the type of thing that you're talking about are neurotics, and potentially, let's say, non-pathological neurotics, but just everyday neurotics. Neurotics, someone who suffered from, say, a death of somebody, and a suffering that is, you know, kind of reasonable and understandable. And I think that's deeply important. But I'm thinking about, if you're suffering from autistic or perverse or psychotic symptoms. So for example, if you're an exhibitionist and you go out and you expose yourself to people, and that's how get its sexual desire. That's what binds your anxiety. Or say you're a voyeur and you find yourself breaking into women's homes or something like that. So those are perverse symptoms, for example. And I'm like, that I think psychoanalysis can help with, and that those kind of symptoms for me aren't the kind of symptom that one just lives with, partly because they impinge obviously on legal issues and on ethics, how you encounter the other, and damage your relationship. So again, it's like I totally, as well, for me, whenever I talk about the priest and the psychoanalyst, which Paul Tillich talks about a little bit, it's got like, yeah, they kind of are on a continuum. Your personal trauma is connected to the universal trauma of being, they're connected. But when you have, say, as I say, let's take a symptom of exhibitionism. What what does one do with that? Because what does one just go to, your collective or my communion and just learn to be? I don't think it's enough. I don't think you can dissipate that symptom just purely in that kind of environment. Now, I'm actually a bit skeptical of whether psychoanalysis can do much either, to be honest. And I know we've got some analysts in the room, like Matt's there. But yeah, does that make sense? That, the types of symptoms like that are psychotic or autistic or perverse, not neurotic symptoms. Like,
It makes sense, but we live psychologically in a different world. Like you still have this hope that you can improve something maybe a tiny bit, and but this is what not maybe we are not responsible for it, but other people, and we kind of permit them to exist because they're relatively not as useful as we are, but relatively useful. And my psychological world is like a world of the collapse, like we will all die tomorrow, and like it's not relevant anymore. And it might be my trauma response or something like it, but I still think that this kind of thinking might be important without reducing it to trauma response, like this kind of apocalyptic thinking, which in relation to this questioning what, looking for what actually can be improved and what we can allow to be improved. It's not just relevant, it's just about something. I'm like this crazy person who is screaming in the street, we're going to die. Like it's not my thing I'm discussing. But yeah.
because I was talking to a friend last night who is part of AA, and she was saying something interesting, which was she said AA at its best doesn't promise happiness, doesn't promise that if you get off alcohol, your life will be better, anything like that. Like technically, all AA does is says this seems to work if you want to get off alcohol. If you're an alcoholic and you personally have, like, they're not knocking on doors, they're not asking people to join, but if, say, I'm an alcoholic and I find that my drinking is causing an amount of suffering that means I go to AA, and I might go to AA wanting to be happy, wanting to have a better life, but technically they're like, no, that's not, you might even be more unhappy, you might be more miserable, you might be more anxious. The only thing this does is you have a particular issue, and that particular issue we actually can alleviate. And I wonder whether there's a limited kind of a sense, again, in psychoanalysis, in terms of general neurosis, like the idea that we're all hysterical, like there is a cosmic hysteria, there's a cosmic anxiety, and going to analysis to alleviate that anxiety, yes, that is, that's the point of bad therapy and counseling and life coaching, but to have a space where in a way one encounters the truth of universal anxiety is great. But I'm still coming back to this. But I have a problem with alcoholism or exhibitionism, and that's impinging, like just like having a broken arm. We're all going to die, but the doctor, you go into a doctor and say you've got a broken arm, the doctor obviously doesn't go, there's no point fixing it because you're going to die. Like they go like, well, I'll bandage your broken arm, but you've still got a terminal illness called life. Um, Not that the doctor would say that. So I guess I'm kind of like, the reason why I'm discussing this with you is like I see what I do and what you do as, I mean, as a type of um invitation for people who want to encounter the universal the dimension of asymmetry or um of death drive. But for me, psychoanalysis still has potentially a lot to offer for non-neurotic or even pathologically neurotic symptoms. But like I said, it's easy to take like a perverse symptom like exhibitionism, because that um that is a problem for other people and for yourself and for society. And um yeah, I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but that's, yeah.
Actually, very good example. Again, every time the AA is a great example. But so instead of the therapeutic intention, which psychotherapy and to some extent psychoanalysis represent, claiming that there is certain problem that we can fix, again, with the path from A, which the worst situation is not that good, to B, where situation is improved. I would rather claim, and it might help actually, like it might help them, it might have the effect of help, even though it's not the intention, retroactively in some form. But instead of exposing direction where this can be fixed, I would rather, or what I'm responsible for is the dimension where it will get even worse. Because, for example, the fact that someone is alcoholic, it might be not the problem that you need to fix and the person will be happy, life will be better, but it might be a coping mechanism and which normally was not just addiction, which is also addiction, but doesn't mean that might be also a coping mechanism with existential trauma. And there are lots of people who just, if they got rid of their addiction, just commit suicide. And this is what actually helped them to live. That was their lifestyle and as happy as they can get, So not necessarily, like exposing this dimension where it's going to get worse if you will stop doing it, actually.
Yes.
And it might help because you just there was not stigmatizing their suffering and not promising them to be happy, something that they won't, but like genuinely being there with them, sharing in the tragedy, like showing that it's even worse, it's going to be even worse, and being there for them, or being others sharing this pain of existence. And it might help retroactively, even though there is no intention to help. It's the opposite intention. It just takes away this oppression of demand that there's something wrong with you and you'll need to improve yourself and you'll be better. It takes away oppression of this intention way, like it's you as good as you get, and this is as happy as you get, and it will get even worse. It's just the current small problem becomes irrelevant, it disappears.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I have a friend who was very religious conservative, and one stage we were discussing it many years ago, decades ago, and he said in an outburst, "I need religion." And it really turned out he did. He had what I would say is this kind of psychotic structure, and his belief wasn't just a belief. It was propping up something worse. It was hiding. So when he lost his religion through an unfortunate set of circumstances, it collapsed. He killed himself, and he killed himself because it was performing a function. And when that function was taken away from him, and he tried to bind that anxiety with other things, and it didn't work, and he took his own life. And so yeah, whenever someone's got a symptom, is like it's not about, and I like this about analysis, it's not about taking away the symptom because it's there for a reason. But by creating a space in which one might very slowly begin to see what's much worse beneath it or within it. So yeah. Yes. What do we do? Because then for me that's a benefit, and of course this is where the sticking point comes in. I think where our work is interestingly connected is I think you're about radical grace, to use a religious term, in the sense of grace is radical acceptance without the need for change, without anything. There with no buts, no ifs, no ands. It's a pure space of you don't need to change, you don't need to move, you don't need to do anything. There's nothing, just pure acceptance. Paul Tillich said that grace is the acceptance that you're accepted. That when you experience grace is when you can integrate that radical acceptance of your being. And then I want to say that I do think there is an empirically beneficial dimension to grace as opposed to self-help, as opposed to moving from A to B. And I do think that that's in your work as well, but I know you're very cautious about any economic promises, any hope of anything.
Yeah. I think this is what you're suggesting with grace. In a way, it might be more feminist, because that's my problem with Christianity, not being feminist, like how to switch it into the more feminist perspective. And with all the attempts doing it, basically Christian feminist theologists would criticize Christianity for being male-centered and I would add that the very idea of a subject that male-centered perspective presupposes is and what is embodied in psychoanalysis is that this past, which is represented by, you were discussing the subject with desire, intention outside of itself, intention of something to possess something. It's just a male subject. And religion, Christianity also represent this path from earthly life to somewhere which is phallic symptom. You need symbol. You need to reach. You have desire, and you need to reach something. Like either it's enjoyment or it's salvation, God. So this path. And female subject or would be different subject without trying to possess, without the path, but be more self-content and caring, not aiming to possess anything, without desire. It's like self-content. And it's also a distinction between Kristeva, what she calls the linear time, male time, with the progress, the intention, the path, somewhere from earth to heaven, wherever, achieving stuff, what men like. And women time would be time of repetition, with time of, we can say maybe spiral time, and the linear time would be just a path of it. Maybe way of sustaining it, the tiny part of it. There is never a success, so it means this grace, you don't need to get anywhere. It's all just for nothing, this caring, not in a way of possessing and improving, just standing together in tragedy, something like it. And I also like it, you probably remember that I wanted to discuss with you this strange idea about mothering God, instead of, because what I'm thinking is it might be feminist perspective, it's strange one, but nonetheless it's almost a joke. But with the perspective of conventional perspective of religion, where okay, God is in this individualized profane idea of God as male individual, parental figure. But this parental, it's maybe not such a problem that it's a male, but the problem is that we treat God this profane way as paternal figure, which means that we are children in relation to God. Like we would pray for something, ask something, occupying the position of a child in relation to God, which is like God is there as illusion, maybe according to Freud, the one of eternal parent who would protect us, restore justice. We would ask something, but there is the feeling that there is someone always there to care for us. But even if we talk about the negative theology or radical theology with the death of God, it's still quite, it's still from this position of a child, resentimental child, Father, why you forsaking me, it's position that you're supposed to be there, but you're not. And even acknowledging death of God, it's still like resentimental, why have you died? Why you abandoned me? Still a position of a child. And I'm thinking, what if it's a position of a parent of a child, mother precisely of a child, like giving birth of a child, but not in a sense, this like give birth to God in your soul, or even Zizek form of humanity retroactively give birth to God, like very idea of switching position from relating to God as a child to relating to God as a parent who is responsible for taking care of a God, either as illusion or one more step from here, if God is dead and you are mothering the dead God, that's like the cool version of it, in a position not of a parent, which we are not going through with the idea of suicidal God. Like we see God as this a more mature position, feeling sorry for God almost, or not trusting God as someone superior to us, but rather strange creature or strange form of existence. But what if it's parental and the God is dead? So you kind of responsible for mourning God that was never born or stillborn or something, or you killing him even though he doesn't exist. Like there are a variety of ways how God is non-existent, but parental, not childish relation to dead God, but parental, motherly relation. You are responsible. You are killing it at the same time, creating it, and it's dead. And we together in mourning it, and him, he, her, whoever, and or death. And there is nothing we can do in relation to it.
Yeah.
Something
Well,
like it.
yeah. Well, okay. So let me kind of, in a nutshell, kind of describe what I think of God and this thing, and see if this connects with what you're saying or disconnect. I think it's slightly different, but maybe in interesting ways. So, in terms of childhood development, you've got uh alienation and separation. Bruce Fink talks about this, and like so alienation is where the infant uh experiences distance for everybody else, for distance from the mother, other, the maternal function, right? There's a certain sense of they begin to have an inside and outside. Uh, and this is the paternal function helps to do this. And if this doesn't happen, psychosis in terms of Lacanian structures, ontology of psychosis, then separation is the second step. If this doesn't happen, it's perversion, but separation is where you realize you're not just separate from the other is separate from themselves. So in the first step, where you have a distance from the maternal other, you can think that you are the answer to that separation. You can bridge that separation, and the lack in the other can be plugged up, and you can plug up that lack. And so you can be everything to the other and an instrument of their jouissance, which is the perverse fantasy. And then in separation, you realize that the mother is not the subject of demand, making demands that can be fulfilled, demands that you can answer, so that, and fill them up, but they're a creature of desire. So they're full of multiple fluid desires. You can't fulfill them because desire is mimetic, et cetera, et cetera. So the infant then moves into symbolic satisfaction. They can't be one with their mother, but they can win a race at school and get a prize, right? And a shitty symbolic satisfaction, whatever. So theologically, something similar is going on for me biblically, is that the first experience of religion is that you're alienated from the divine. The divine, there is some distance between you and the divine. You want to plug up that distance. You want to, uh, be a servant of God. God is basically whole and complete. If there is something that God loves in you, that so you can kind of plug up some sort of lack in God, but it's not the lack of desire. So you've got alienation in religion. And that's most traditional religions. You're alienated from God. You want to get back to the oneness. And then for me in Christianity, in a radical reading, you have the second step, which is separation. And separation is when you realize that you're not just separate from God, God is separate from God's self. You experience the self-divided absolute, that absolute reality is fundamentally divided. And then you unify then with the absolute through realizing that what you both share in common is lack. So lack is in everything and in yourself. So you paradoxically unify with the divine in realizing that divine is not at unity with itself, which is called Trinity, the non-at-oneness of God with God's self. And that's the crucifixion, the crucified God. So for me, and this is what I might call my next book, is the hysterical God, but that one realizes that God is, when maybe not so much dead, but hysterical. God is self-divided. And even in the movie Barbie, it's interesting that one of the ways that the Barbie dolls are freed is through an embrace of their hysteria, where they go, I am different things to different people. I'm not one, I have to be sexual and I have to be motherly, I have to be caring and I have to be cool. And this is the point of the film where kind of they start to become free, but not by overcoming their hysteria, but by embracing their hysteria. And for me, the truth is, and Freud says, in fact, it's in your article, I think we're all a bit hysterical, is that hysteria was first associated with women, which then led to the insight that actually that is the truth of everybody. And that's what I mean by the death of God. The death of God is that God is hysterical. And by acknowledging that, we find freedom. And that for me is kind of what makes Christianity interesting. But I don't know if that connects or not.
Yeah,
With a
it just
feminist reading of the Bible, I don't know.
I just think that mothering dead God sounds cool.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
But yeah. So do we want to talk to people?
No, but let's do it anyway.
If anyone have questions, you can ask us. It's Julian. Hi.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
How are you? Hi Peter. Hi Julie. If I focus on the word illusion,
Yeah.
what do you guys think it is? And do you see any role for it in what you're talking about?
Where are you
Be
from?
it church or psychoanalytic?
Are you
It's a
Irish?
broad one, but I'm just throwing it out.
Are you from Ireland? Are you in Ireland?
Yes, I am.
Oh, no way. Whereabouts?
Donegal.
Donegal. Oh, very good, very good. I'm just up the road. I'm Belfast. Well, I'm on holiday at the
Bit
moment, but
down the road, but I'm never. That's okay.
yeah, yes. I'm sorry, you're asking about illusion.
Yeah, where do you perceive, first of all, what is illusion to you? And where do you perceive it as regards its potential benefit vis-a-vis your church or your psychoanalysis? But it's the word itself.
Mhm. Julie, do you want to start or me
Yeah,
or?
well, normally in psychoanalysis they would use word fantasy, but I prefer illusion because it like more connects with not only psychoanalysis but psychotherapy as such. And there is term in psychotherapy, in psychology, positive illusions, and it means that we are overly positive in relation to reality, and this is what helps us to be psychologically healthy. And they would even in psychology they would measure how you are how your thinking is adequate. But how I use it, it's even more broad philosophical term. It's not that we are wrong. So illusion is that we are wrong. Normally positive illusions, I think all illusions are positive, because if it's negative, it's the opposite of illusion for me. But illusion is overly positive thinking about reality. But for me, unlike in psychology, scientific psychology, there is true, adequate comprehension of reality that you can measure. I think that like illusion is structural. The truth doesn't exist, or rather, the truth would be the absence of truth, something like it. So it's more complicated and more existential and less straightforward idea that you're wrong and there is something right, and you can fix it, your comprehension of reality, and you'll get it, the truth. For me, it's like illusion is all there is, and the truth would be rather just negation of illusion, which you can never get rid of, something like it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to kind of maybe drill down to what kind of more into the question you're asking, but I'm just initially thinking of like the distinction that Freud makes between delusion and illusion, where I think he used the example of a young girl who might dream of being a princess, and then finds out that she actually is. He said a delusion for Freud, if I remember correctly, is necessarily wrong. Like a delusion is completely, or is it the other way around, actually? Well, I'll go with, if I'm correct me if I'm the wrong way around here, but an illusion is it's got wishes involved, but it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's the girl is dreaming about being a princess because she has these desires, these wishes. But you could be a princess, whereas a delusion is, you see a dragon or something like that. And I guess the interesting thing in psychoanalysis is the illusion tells the truth of your own desires, your own wishes. That's where the meat is. And you can't, see through an illusion to get to the truth. The illusion kind of captures a deep dimension of yourself and of your desire. But I'd be interested in kind of, I don't know if I'm answering or getting to the question you're asking. Do you want to come back briefly and
Really briefly, I'm conscious that there's a whole lot of people other than me. I was trying to nail down whether you guys would see it as a good thing or not.
I
Julie seems to see it as a positive. I'm not too sure about yourself, but it's fine.
well, yeah, I see it as a necessity. Like
Yeah,
our
it
illusions
is,
are
isn't it? It's a
fantasies.
necessity. It really is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
and
where I
it
was
also tells
transferring
us,
it over to religion or psychoanalysis. Yes.
yeah, and also tells us the deepest truth about ourselves. That's the key. Is like the truth is not kind of in a sense the objective. It's in the dreams. It's in the fantasy. That's why in psychoanalysis you talk about your dreams and your fantasies, and because there's something in those that's more important than what you empirically do. And to use the example that Lacan uses is if you're pathologically jealous that your wife is having an affair and she turns out she is having an affair, you're still pathologically jealous. You know, it's like it's the truth is in the pathological jealousy, not in the empirical reality. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian. Who else want to?
There's Sawyer's got his hand up.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Julie and Peter. Good to see you again, Peter. So my question is, so I've been, I guess a project that I'm kind of working on right now is it's some way is related to this idea of illusion a little bit, but so we have like the idea of the death of God as, I suppose, the death of something external, or the death of like an external unity or something like this. But I also think that insofar as I understand that the death of God, there's also like the death of or at least a threat to the function of belief, or like a threat to the ability to apprehend like something like the real and assign an A equals A. And I think, so I'm wondering like how this fits into the idea of belief and grace. Because Peter, you'd mentioned grace earlier as a kind of, well, you'd related it to Julie's project. And I think that there is something antagonistic between belief and grace in a radical sense. And I wonder if you two have anything to say about this. Like maybe grace is a kind of almost anti-religious concept because it threatens the capacity or I guess the subject's capacity to imagine and hold images, so that's my first part. And then the second part is this. I wonder what you two think about perversion and how we can think about perversion in contemporary society. Like one thing that I've been thinking about is and Peter, you touched on perversion just a little bit, but like there's something about I suppose the threat to the death of God as a threat, not just as an experience, but also as a sort of threat. And I suppose how does that, like, is there anything to like looking at the world right now, and I suppose fetishism is a very pervasive thing, but so anyway, those are kind of my two questions.
Can I
Well,
answer?
I'm going to say a couple of quick things. Yeah, and I don't know if I will be answering you directly, so come back and bounce back. But Lacan, famously kind of said that the atheist is not so much saying God is dead, but God is unconscious. I like the death of God, but when he says God is unconscious, I find that really interesting. And there's a number of ways I think you can interpret what he means. But one of them is potentially if you think of the unconscious as nothing, as a type of nothing that disturbs and disrupts the smooth functioning of everything, something that is true but not computable, something that exists within the total system of nature, but as an exception, then that's what I kind of mean by God. The signifier God is that is a signifier for not something that exists as such, but insists and disrupts the smooth surface of being. So that's what I mean by the death of God. And then I'll just relate it to grace very quickly. It's like, for me, grace is a privileged way of encountering this disruption, because in radical grace, you encounter your own self-division. You encounter your own chaotic being. even actually my friend who I was talking to about AA the other night, she said that the first time she went to an AA meeting and she was asked, "Are you an alcoholic?" And she, in the space where she felt free, the first time she ever said it, she was like, "Yes, I'm an alcoholic." And she said the feeling of just saying that was this incredible moment because she just felt completely accepted and she was able to name something that she hadn't named before. And in other words, kind of acknowledge her own struggles. So grace for me is radical and anti-ideological because it is the space where you actually encounter this negativity in yourself. So that's how I connect the death of God or the God is unconscious with grace. I'd say I don't know if that's related or not, but Julie, do you want to jump in or?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think that the internal death and external death, for me, it's more about internal death. And I use a lot Heidegger's concept, being towards death, something that defines human existence. And the way Peter claimed that we're already dead, probably that's what you mean. Like this deadness, mortality, not mortality, but actually being dead, what defines us. And the life would be rather effect of the process of destruction, or like the state of being dead, and encountering this state, the emptiness, deadness, is traumatic. Like for Lacan, touching the core of the real is felt like trauma. For existentially, for Heidegger, it will be, we feel it, the death within life, that when we get in touch with the structural death, we feel anxiety, like we feel emptiness that defines us. And the relationship between the external death of God, what is coded in words, that the death of God, and this internal, I think they're quite coincide in here. And explaining this, like people would like to ask the question a lot, what is this nothingness or absence? Like, how do I understand? Is this existential, or is this just absence, physical absence? And for me, the absence, the nothingness or death, it unites both dimensions, the physical dimension, because it's absent. How can it has no dimension? And great example for it is the Amazon. You know, when Amazon asks people, people are joking a lot to present evidence of the absent parcels, and they just take a picture of the door without the parcel, so of the absence of a parcel. And it's like, this is for me, it's absurd, but this is how you can capture it in its absurdity. And this is what unites us, the absence, because it doesn't belong to anyone, and because, yeah, it just non-existent. So it's both internal, external, and not individualized, like the absent parcel from Amazon, which unites people in their suffering and make them laugh and or cry. It's a great example.
And the key for me, oh, go ahead, sorry.
With perversion, I don't actually like, since I started to think in psychoanalytic terms, I try to avoid this term, even though I was using it before a lot, but I was using it in Foucault and Deleuzean discourse, because for them, it's not sexualized yet. They actually, like, it's different from psychoanalytic perspective, because initial term perversion was religious term, when you comprehend the doctrine, pervert the doctrine, like not wrong type of doctrine or wrong interpretation, something like this. So for Deleuze, it's like misplacing, perverting sense of something, it's doubting the obvious correct established sense of something, which means exposing kind of this emptiness, this senselessness, to establish new sense, like Nietzschean playing with the serious things, using the religious dogmas as toys, something like it. And with Freud, both terms, all those terms like perversion, masochism, they exist almost inclusively in context of sexuality. And this is what I'm trying to avoid, because once you're trapped into talking about sexuality, like you're done. It principally takes I'm done. It brings with it the certain comprehension of human being, and this emphasis on sexuality that psychoanalysis is known for. And even though my Lenka Zupanji and psychoanalysts would normally claim that you cannot deprive psychoanalysis of this emphasis on sexuality, because psychoanalysis is going to be like, you'll deprive yourself of psychoanalysis because it's the central thing. But I think that, well, I try to do the opposite. I'm intentionally avoiding talking about sexuality. Like, I'm still a teenager in relation to Alenka Zupancic, my mentor, who is telling not to do it, and I'm doing it intentionally just for the sake of it. And I'm seeing what, because I think it's important, like depriving psychoanalysis of idea of pleasure and sexuality, and see what will remain. So perversion I'm not using because of this connotation with sexuality, and automatically brings a certain comprehension of a human being and relationship that I'm trying to avoid. It's not that much enough about death for me to use it.
But let me
Yeah.
try to redeem perversion for a second. Oh,
I wanted
sorry.
to quickly say I actually wasn't trying to use perversion in a sexual sense as well. I think I was trying to use it more maybe in the Deleuzian sense, just in terms of like the threat to assigning, like the threat to the subject's ability to assign a god, if that makes sense. Like I almost feel like there's something to perversion in the sense of when that is threatened, there's like a kind of maybe like accelerated way, manner of acting towards identification, or acting towards collapsing the space or something like that.
Killing God or something like it. Destroying God.
Yeah.
The Lacanian, like, so, you know, I would like to, you know, definitely as well move perversion away from just purely sexuality, although I think it expresses itself in sexuality. But like Lacan famously wrote the perverse fantasy as object A in relation to, well, the Barthes subject, I guess. But basically, Lacan's definition of perversion is that you see yourself as the object of desire of the other. Very similar to hysteria, but also fundamentally different. So hysteria, the hysteric, is someone who makes themselves the answer to the other's desire. So an hysteric will evoke the other's desire, will enjoy evoking the other's desire. But the pervert evokes the other's jouissance. Stephanie Sweel's, her book on perversion, is great on this. What the pervert wants is, they see themselves not as the answer to the other's desire. So the hysteric ultimately doesn't want to satisfy the other person. They want to keep the desire going and kind of keep the desire provoked. But the perverse subject sees the other as lacking, but in a very concrete way that can be filled, that can be plugged up. So through a very specific set of things. So what that means, and this is what I think, like, you can talk about, and Zizek means by the perverse core of, or the perverse version of Christianity, is a Christianity in which God, you know, condemns us all so that God can be the answer, right? So that's kind of a perverse thing, is you set the house on fire so that you can rescue the people in the house, right? That's kind of a perverse kind of thing. And the way out of perversion in sense of structurally is when you realize that the other, so the problem for the perverse individual is that they have not been able to signify the mother's desire. So they think they're the answer to the mother's desire. And in a kind of Lacanian thing is that the infant hasn't been able to desire other things. They actually think that they can satisfy completely the jouissance of the other. So that's what I think lies at the core of perversion, which I think is helpful. I think that's a really helpful definition. Doesn't, because we're all perverse a wee bit in our sexuality if you take the kind of the notion of perversion as non-reproductive sexual activity. But the perverse subject is the one who thinks they are the answer to the jouissance of the other. And there's a perverse version of Christianity, which is that, you know, we plug up the demand of God. You know, we do what God says and God is happy. A non-perverse form of Christianity is, again, realizing that the absolute is not is riven with anxiety is not at one with itself. Therefore, you cannot satisfy the absolute, because and that's where satisfaction is precisely. Satisfaction is found in the fact that there is no ultimate satisfaction. Anyway, that's how I kind of understand perversion. And very, very quickly, the interesting thing about the death of God for me is it's not that externally we realize that God is dead. God has to realize that God is dead. And that's the difference. So theism says God is alive, atheism says God is dead, and this position says God realizes God is dead. And that's why I want a church, is because you have to have a church in which the liturgy enacts the death of God. Because, as I say, like in the typical Freudian sense, is you know your father died, say your father died, but your father doesn't know. Your father continues to live within you. And in a sense, the father has to realize the father is dead. So that's the core of Church of the Contradiction, is that God has to realize that God is dead. And you have to do that in a liturgical way.
Thank you both. We have a question from the Night of the World, finally.
Hey y'all. Yeah, thanks for this. Julie, you talk about I guess destigmatization, and that's something I'm really interested in, because when I first read your stuff and heard you speak, I kind of had a like, how can there not be a therapeutic aspect to, you know, what you're talking about? Because I feel a therapy from it almost, you know, in the sense of this destigmatization, like against like this pure positivity culture. Like I almost have images of like the opposite of live, laugh, love signs, like like you know, die, cry, hate. Maybe I'll hang one of those. But anyways, I really liked your Mapo Bridge paradox, that because I had listened to like Leon Brenner and some Stain Bandershul, and they had talked about like a story of Lacan saying that the analyst who knows sending his patients to see the beauty of Paris from the top of the Eiffel Tower, and the paradox of them ending up jumping from the Eiffel Tower. So, you know, that those two things connected for me really well there. But I guess, yeah, I just kind of had a question about the destigmatizing aspect. I feel like I see you and Peter coming together in this communion type of aspect, like the Church of Contradiction, the A-stroke theism, the destigmatization, like, you know, like, do you see yourselves in as like coming together around the whole aspect of communion in that sense? Like how Zizek says, like the fall is the beginning of human freedom, like that kind of a central negativity of like being with other views, being with other, I guess, like standing together despite this deconstructive aspect of everything, like a groundlessness.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was very rambling probably, but
That was
it
great.
just things on
That
my
was
mind.
I just have to say secretly what I'm trying to do is I think that me and Julie have a very close similarity in what we're trying to do. So I'm trying to draw her more into that. But she might be more resistant to what I'm doing. I don't know, but I think there's a real similarity, and this idea of communion, absolutely. And oh, and by the way, Zizek had a brilliant thing in his most recent book, Christian Atheism, where he talked about atheism, but he did the A as an italicized A, as in objet putia, right? The object cause of desire. So he talked about not theism or atheism, but atheism or atheism. And that's I think captures what I'm trying to do, is that God is the name of objet putia, of a type of nothingness that is something that insists. And I do think there's a similarity in what I'm doing and what Julie's doing. But anyway, Julie, what do you think?
Yeah, and I forgot, it's great that you both mentioned it, because when I was talking about Mapper Bridge, like the first version, which they're trying to turn into Bridge of Life, and how they connect people through demanding them to be happy and trying to fix them, and it turns out the opposite. this for me represents what you call community, and the my version of Mappa breach, which is a breach of death, where we just perishing together and witnessing each other suffering and nothing we can do about it. That would be communion, right? Sharing nothing. So that's the distinction of community and communion. And I also forgot to mention what I disagree with in this paper, because I wrote it before I'm writing my book. I'm still presenting here, it still answers the question of what has to be done. And this is what I don't like, what I don't agree with Zizek now. It's still this intention, how we're supposed to be. And Zizek is in a position of telling people how, what is better, like the position of the expert trying to fix, he's not practicing psychotherapy, so he's not working individually with people trying to fix them, but fix society, which is even kind of worse in a way, like fixing, turning those last humans that he doesn't like into better kind of humans. And I kind of, this paper, it still has this intention to be an expert, to show what is really going on, and to show that like what we don't have to, what we have to stop doing to make society better, like this other version of Mappa Bridge. And in my book, I was trying to step away from here, even though it might not be possible, because the very act of writing a book, it presupposes that you are talking, telling, explaining something, and having doctrine or whatever. But still, I would be more with not in staying in genuinely not knowing what to do, and not acting as this messiah, even negative messiah, you know, imposing some kind of knowledge, clarification, and leading somewhere to the better version of Mappa Bridge. So in psychoanalysis, we have something like it, that it's psychoanalyst is subject who is supposed to know, but you have to, in Lacanian psychoanalysis, you have to take this hope away at the end, but it's still kind of playing, it's the necessary illusion for it, that playing as if you know, and then exposing yourself. I even think that psychoanalysts are trained, like the whole training of psychoanalysts is training to be an asshole, like actually treating people in this way, which all like coded in structure of psychoanalysis, the way people are treated, but it still presupposes that you know that there is no knowledge or something, like it is still expert of telling that there is no truth, something like it, and there's still hierarchy of analyst and analysand. And this is what I would want to get rid of. Just, you know, I'm just looking for friends who don't know, and who are not trying to fix me, and I won't, in exchange, I'm not trying to fix them. Except for in my therapy, what is like negative practice, that you would also have to pay me for that. But except for it, there is no hierarchy. Like we both don't know, and in exchange of you not fixing me, I'm not trying to fix you. That's it. So kind of this extended practice is what interests me, when we don't know and no one is telling anyone what have to be done. Depriving of this position of both psychoanalyst and philosopher, the way they play in. So I'm like glitching philosopher who started with idea that philosopher know better and supposed to tell others, inform them, and lead them somewhere, but and like being disillusioned in it. And I would preserve myself existing in this dimension, losing it, which also death of God. And that's what I'm trying to share with others. Not that much in this chapter yet, but more in my book, where they actually don't know. It was all like exposing that all that I said before, including in this book, is bullshit, like something like it.
So a couple of quick things. Like, you know, one thing I would say, like the subject's supposed to know, I would say that in a weird this sense, the analyst doesn't try to evoke that. That's what the analysand brings to the table. And if they don't bring it to the table, analysis doesn't really happen. But in a sense, the analyst doesn't even have to try to make it happen or create an illusion. It's like, it's the necessary illusion of the neurotic, is that they can't help but treat the subject supposed to know. And the analyst technically doesn't even encourage it. Like I'm in analysis at the moment, and I'm always asking the analyst in one sense, be an expert, and they always kind of refuse it. But you kind of bring, for me, subject supposed to know is what the analyze and brings to the table. And the reason why I think it's important is, like, in terms of infancy, the idea of the incest taboo, the prohibition of the kind of oneness with the mother. The weird thing about that is it's a prohibition of something that's already impossible. You can't have oneness with the mother anyway, right? So why prohibit something impossible? Why is there this paternal function that prohibits an impossibility? And the idea is that because the psychotic, in a way, is right, because the psychotic doesn't experience the prohibition, but that causes all sorts of problems. Is that it's an impossibility that in one sense has to be believed and then overcome. That's what the neurotic does. So they believe the prohibition and then they overcome it. And in a similar way, it's like you believe the subject's supposed to know, the other has this expertise and this answer, and that replays that. And then hopefully you overcome it. You eventually realize the analyst is just a divided subject like yourself. But the other thing is, in terms of Zizek, and see what you think of this, is like Zizek would say that in a way, like Kierkegaard says, life is lived forwards but understood backwards. And the owl of Minerva for Hegel spreads its wings at dusk, that you actually know and knows the future of what's right and what's good, and it might not be good. The role of the theorist and the analyst is to bring up the contradictions of the present. And if you bring up the contradictions of the present, eventually they become so unbearable that something else can emerge. So if a couple goes to therapy and you don't know whether they're going to stay together or whether they're not, the analyst doesn't know. But by bringing up all of the contradictions and antagonisms in the relationship, the only thing that can't stay the same is the relationship. The only thing that can't stay the same, once all of the antagonisms are bubbling at the surface, is something has to change. They have to break up. They have to change their type of relationship, whatever. And that for me is the way of trying to get away from progressivism, because the progressive knows the future, the progressive knows where everything's going, becoming an apocalypticist. The apocalypticist doesn't know what the future is. There's an inherent unknowability of the future, but what the apocalypticist can do is raise the contradiction of the present age to such a height that it collapses into potentially a deeper contradiction. And just in terms of capitalism, for example, is the central antagonism of capitalism is surplus value. That everything in the market, in a perfect capitalist system, everything gets its value except for one thing, the worker. The worker is always undervalued by definition within capitalism. And the idea for Marx, the idea is that, and so Marx didn't write about the future. He wrote only a few pages about communism. It was a critique of capitalism. The idea that if you can raise the contradiction to the level of the symbolic and you can kind of bring it to the surface, capitalism will collapse into something else, but we don't know what that will be. So that's my way of trying to have hope without knowing where things are going. Like, yeah, anyway, and I think that's what Zizek's trying to do, is not paint a picture of what the better future is, but rather always trying to raise the antagonism of the present to the surface.
Thank you, Peter. Courtney was waiting to ask her question.
I'll try to make this as coherent as possible. It's all in my head. I don't know if any of the words will come out right. Well, first off, Julia, I wanted to thank you for what you wrote in your paper, or the chapter that we got to read. I've suffered from anxiety pretty much all of my life, depression, at least since I was a teenager. And this idea that people who have anxiety and depression need to be fixed. I mean, sure, I want to be functional. I want to be able to live my life, but yeah, I appreciate the concept of Mapo Bridge as the bridge of death. I had the thought that maybe we need to found the Church of the Contradiction at Mapo Bridge. But in addition to all of that, I was also diagnosed with ADHD last year at the age of 46 for my first diagnosis. And I've been trying to figure that out at the same time following Peter's work and trying to see how all of that fits together. And I had the thought that, you know, people say, well, Courtney, why are you depressed? They list all the things about my life that should make me not depressed. You know, my family, and I have a nice home, and I you know, have all this, I have all that. I have plenty of food to eat. What do I have to be depressed about? And you know, in my head, I don't speak it out loud, and maybe I should. In my head, I think, have you seen the world? Have you seen the universe we're in? Why would you not be depressed and anxious about this? And in connection with that, I'm wondering, and I'd love to hear feedback from both of you or anybody else who wants to chime in. I'm wondering, I'm seeing myself and other people like me who also have ADHD as prophets. It's like we people who have ADHD, yes, on one hand, like you said, Julie, about depression and anxiety, there's a brain chemical aspect here. There's something about my brain chemicals that does not work the way it works with apparently most other people, which has come as no surprise to anyone who knows me. But this is difficult to put into words. Because my brain chemicals, I don't have the amount of dopamine that would let me pay closer attention to the things that the world tells me to pay attention to. The things that the world tells me I should use to fill up the lack, I can't pay attention to those things. And maybe I and other people like me are the prophets that are speaking with the voice of the abyss, saying, no, you all know that there's something wrong with the world, just like Neo in the Matrix. There's something wrong with the world. There is something missing, and you all know it. And everybody is constantly obsessed with this frenetic pursuit of filling that void up, filling up the abyss that cannot be filled. And those of us who can't bring ourselves to pay attention to the fillers, we're the ones saying, pay attention. Don't look at the cosmos. Something is wrong with it. I don't know, that should have, I wish that had been more coherent than it was, but you know, that's just how things are. So
yeah, no, it's very coherent to me. I mean, it's interesting because in some respects, I think you're saying that certain people, and they're the artists and you're an artist, sometimes don't have the defense mechanisms that allow for a repression of anxiety. And so in some respects, that can be the site of the revelation of truth. I think there's something very profound in that. I know Julie's work is very egalitarian, and I think Julie says, you know, this is always happening in everybody, but also there are certain people who can't keep it hidden, and there's something there. Yes, I think that's a revelation. I would call that kind of a revelation of a deep truth. But anyway, Julie, go for it. You might have more to say.
Yeah, it's the great, very coherent comment, as coherent as, you know, one can explain this kind of reality. I totally agree, but was seeing what what is called depressed, anxious people defined as, given this diagnosis, they can be seen as prophet. But I also think that this positive injunction is at the same time a way of not tolerating, stigmatizing people, but at the same time tolerating what they represent, because it's very hard to tolerate it. It's, you know, and I'm sure that you're doing this too. You pretend that you're not depressed. You pretend that you functional, or it can get better, just for them to satisfy, to be more tolerable for them. And it's like this double illusion. So at the same time, this hope that what you represent, it's so scary, the hope that it can be fixed, it helped them to tolerate you. It's like accepting through not accepting, waiting to deal with you. But it precisely because it resonates with them. They know what you represent. That's why they're horrified of what you represent, the depression and anxiety. And at the same time, this is how very term diagnosis of depression functions. At the same time, it's way of inclusion people in society and stigmatizing them, including because at least it's now recognized, it's much better than they would tell you just lazy, you know, that now it's a serious thing, the diagnosis of depression. But at the same time, it's much more than just diagnosis. It's, and I think people know that. That's why they want to reduce this. And even people who have depression, we would prefer to reduce this to diagnosis, just diagnosis, because we know that it's so much more and it's endless. It just disappear without ability to talk and communicate anything. And it is quite like those people, everyone, but probably those who have diagnosis of depression, they are at the same time prophets. And Peter is able to pronounce this word. I'm not apocalyptic prophets. Not the one who are telling what to do to bring a better world, like what is wrong, in order for it to be fixed. Like more this dark representing nothing can be done. You know, it's quite hard to tolerate. But I think it's important to this kind of negative revelation, which is the opposite even of revelation. And for me, except for the anxiety, depression, normally in depressive realism, women would be seen as less depressed. But for me, the way one woman, the way she functioned during PMS, and this is what we call it functions in the same way as even as a diagnosis, in order to stigmatize and see it as, so women, perfect women, with, they supposed to be in our culture is women during ovulation, like we're supposed to be happy, you know, loving. And during PMS, it's like alienated experience. We even alienated from ourselves because we're kind of inadequate. We hate at the same time, we love at the same time, like all the horror, the dysfunctioning. I think is the quite, this is the prophetic thing too. You represent, you're struggling with yourself, and you represent the impasse of the world. Like it's you're destroying yourself from within, and you want to destroy world, and people who you love the most, you hate them the most at the same time. Like what you represent, because it's so hard to tolerate. You want to limit it to the diagnosis, to distortion of who you are. But I think that it's actually who we are. It's horrifying, but unfortunately. Yeah, so not only those diagnoses, but like the much more ways to be prophet.
I wonder, I know we're probably running out of time very quickly. I want to say, like, because I have more of this desire for, or this movement, more this idea that things can maybe progress, I want to kind of almost make a distinction between a political moment that has contradictions within it, and the contradiction that is subjectivity. So what Hegel calls absolute knowledge is the encounter with this radical hysteria, this radical not at oneness. However, it manifests itself, it sediments itself in different ways in different epochs. So as I said, in capitalism, for example, if you take the Marxist view, the symptom, so capitalism has symptoms, which are contradictions, that like homelessness, bad CEOs, you know, wealth inequality, but you can imagine a capitalism without those. And so you can kind of you can also dissect those symptoms and maybe fix them a little bit, and less crime or less whatever. But the symptom is the contradiction that you cannot get rid of without getting rid of without getting rid of the structure itself. It's the symptom that holds together what it looks like it keeps from being held together. That's the symptom. So and the symptom for Marx, in a sense, is, I say, surplus value. You can imagine a capitalism that gets rid of violence and bad CEOs and crime, but you can't imagine a capitalism that gives workers their full value, because it works precisely because workers never get their full value, create surplus value that's usurped for it. But in a sense, that is the contradiction in an historical epoch. Potentially that when you come to terms with that, then it collapses into a different system that has a deeper contradiction, and maybe we can imagine a system in which you know, a better system, whatever. But for me, like, for example, the ideal anti-capitalist subject is, a friend of mine went to buy a boat recently. She'd been researching it for over a year. She wanted to buy a very small sailboat, and she found this old guy selling a sailboat in a private advert on Facebook. She went to see him, and over the course of 2 hours, he kept putting her off buying it, telling her all the hidden costs, all of the difficulties, how to store it, how little she would use it. And she began to realize that she didn't want to buy it. So what you had is the perfect non-rapport, the perfect couple of no sexual relation. There was a buyer who didn't want to buy and a seller who didn't want to sell, who both kind of realized that their enjoyment was not in the buying or the selling, but in the not having. So she enjoyed the research, she enjoyed the looking for a boat, and he enjoyed the fantasy of getting rid of the damn boat and no longer being a sailor. But they were both in this moment be able to directly enjoy their dissatisfaction. So for me, that is therapeutic, because for me, that is the kind of that is the result of this kind of thinking, is its freedom from the lure of something that brings wholeness and completeness, and potentially an ability to sit with and enjoy the incompleteness and the dissatisfaction, which for me creates a different mode of being in the world. A freedom not to be happy, but a freedom from happiness. That's kind of partly what I think is the salvific, the curative dimension of this project. So I just want to kind of say that's where my hope is in that couple who don't want to buy the boat or sell the boat, and that potentially is something valuable. And it's not just, yes, anyway, I don't know if that's valuable or not. I'll just throw that out. Also, I think if enough people were like that, I would prefer not to. If enough people were enjoyed their dissatisfaction, I think that would be that would potentially give rise to a different form of life, a different way of being together, that would have less modern symptoms. By modern symptoms, I'm talking fatigue, burnout, you know, depression, melancholy.
Peter, at some point, I think one of us at some point needs to put you on the spot of really delineating exactly how we enjoy our dissatisfaction. What are the practical applications of this? How do I enjoy having anxiety? I would like to do that.
Yeah. Me too. Like, you know, I preach what I can't do, so But I love that story of my friend, because that for me was a concrete example of something where the two people kind of realize. In fact, I would like to make a short film where a guy for like 20 years keeps going to like a car salesperson, this business, and he continues to try to buy a car, and the salesman puts him off, and this happens over 20 years. And I think there'd be a really interesting short film about a salesperson who doesn't want to sell and a buyer who doesn't want to buy, as an example of the non-sexual relationship that works.
My connection is unstable, so I'm not reliable person right now.
Somebody just put in a question or said there's a scene in Glengarry Glen Ross. That's an amazing film. Tell me the scene if you remember, Julian, because I haven't watched that for so long. But if anyone's
The scene is the boys are hawking property. There's a
Yeah.
competition. Whoever hawks the most property is going to
gets a
get
set of steak knives.
the Cadillac, I think. But
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
that's
same
right.
thing. There's one guy who thinks he's won the Cadillac. He's made this massive sale. But the other guys know that the buyers, they just like talking about it and meeting the salesman.
That's
There you
right.
go.
I
That's the
remember
scene.
it's right. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's that. Oh, that's brilliant. That's a brilliant example. Yes, yeah. And how destructive that is to
Oh, it
the
kills him.
frenetic.
It's horrible.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great anti-capitalist. Yeah, that's yeah. I'll have to go back and watch that. That's a brilliant example. Yeah.
And just look, other people are here, but in that movie, God damn it, the Italian actor, help me, please.
Oh, I forget.
It
I'm terrible at that.
doesn't matter, but he deliberately he
Al
wins
Pacino.
it, but there's no joy in it, so he
Mhm.
hands over the money. I think
Yeah.
you'd like it. It's just it came up. Go for it.
We got a question there from Levon. Is that pronounced?
Well, you finally said my name right. That's great.
Did I? Thankfully, yeah.
You used to
It's
say
impressive.
Lavone. Yeah, no, it's Lavon. I'm thinking of I just watched a show with my kids who play video games, and I used to worry about them playing video games, but I never stopped them from engaging with others online, just so they, because the playground kind of moved online. So I was really happy watching this show with my kids based on the video game Fallout. And in
What's the
this
first
show,
episode of that? So yeah, keep talking. Yeah, I'm very
yeah.
interested.
So I finished the first the season that's up, and there's obviously going to be a second one, but it touches on this concept of everyone thinking they know what will bring happiness, what will actually fix society, and the different groups that are trying. You have this sort of brotherhood that's trying, and you have, the group that went down into these bomb shelters. Just, I don't want to give anything away, but it's really a show that talks about what we're talking about here. And what I would be curious to know is what you were saying, Courtney, about this. How do we actually sit in that place and find contentment there? And when I was sitting and listening to my kids talk about how great this show depicted the game, in that moment, there it was, right? This enjoyment of this totally apocalyptic. I mean, all these nuclear bombs go off, and some people make it underground and others try to survive. I mean, what a mess, right? I think this younger generation, maybe they might figure it out. They've certainly had to face, not having hope. I work with kids who are, they don't have a hope for the future. They kind of just live in the now because they don't even know if there'll be a tomorrow, right? So maybe they'll give us the answers. I don't know. We'll see. And maybe the second season might shed some light on that. It's an interesting watch if you want to see a show that depicts what we're talking about here today.
I'm looking forward to watching the rest. I enjoyed the first episode, so that encourages me to keep going.
Yeah, I also noticed this with teenagers, like they are overly, well, teenagers supposed to be kind of depressed, but it used to be in the crisis that teenagers are going through in a similar way. Middle age crisis, what is called this kind of crisis, it's also might be just locating the trauma of existence in a certain, assigning to it a certain age, meaning that it's supposed to pass as a deviation, temporary deviation. But we can also see those crises as existential revelation, because for teenagers, like, it's the revelation that of the death of the god, let's say. And in the same way, middle age, like, you got disillusioned, what the hell is going on, like, what the fuck is this existence for? And then to overcome, what is called to overcome this kind of crisis, is when you come to terms with imposed ways of existence, but it was before, like when you go to university and you're told certain taught certain knowledge, and then you prepared for certain life, when you accept the ways of the world, and it helps you to stay in touch with illusions, to share illusions with society. But I think that now they're too smart to give up this teenager revelation, what used to be called a crisis. It's not a crisis, it's a revelation. And now there are no remedy. Society doesn't provide remedy illusions. They are not that, they don't function that well anymore. So we just go on in internal crisis. And they maybe, well, they have to, either they will all commit suicide, or they will learn a way to live with it. And it's, which is not the opposite, because life is, I think, is extended suicide. You just postpone your death, or just, it is not just you postpone your death, but you self-destruct and you approach the final, the end of you. That's it. And this is what they are going through. And suicidal person is not actually that different from the rest of people. It just more explicitly self-destructing themselves than people who are just supposed to are not suicidal, who claim not to be suicidal. So I think that's the different, more genuine, maybe, generation for whom illusion doesn't work that much.
Okay, can I, and to be devil's advocate, not so much on that, but I just thought of something. For some reason, association, I remember a sketch that Mitchell and Webb did, these comedians from the UK. And in the sketch, it's a couple, and the couple are talking about, one of them comes in and goes, oh, I just had an affair today. And, oh, yeah, how did that go? Okay, yeah. Oh, and then the other person says, yeah, I was just looking through your emails when you weren't watching. And they go through all these really big things. And then one of them says, listen, it feels like you're really trying to dig at me. You know what, you said about the affair, and you've said about not loving me, or whatever. And what is it? And then the person turns around and says, well, you left the hallway light on. And I think that's what's underneath this, and it basically turns around the thing where sometimes, you're arguing about keeping the hallway light on when really there's a big issue. This sketch turned it around, and there's all these big issues, and behind it was actually something really tiny. And there's a little part of me that thinks that, because I was talking to someone again today, funnily enough, who struggles with existential despair about the fact that we're all going to die. But as we talked, and we've talked before, this person was like, it kind of really felt like what Winnicott calls primal agony, is this genuine despair about the fact that life is meaningless, we're all going to die, is actually connected to her relationship with her father when she was very young, and the fact that she didn't have a place within his desire. So there's a little tiny part of me that wonders whether these big existential experiences actually primarily refer to very basic failures and very basic ways of relating to our primary caregivers. I don't necessarily say I want to go that way, but I just want to throw it out there that something can seem like, of course it's terrifying. We're all going to die. Nothing matters. Everyone we love will die. Everything we ever do will come to nothing. But maybe the fear of that is actually more related to some sort of just very early, very mundane negative experiences we had when we were young. And if we're able to work through those, we find that still we know we're nihilists, but we don't worry about it anymore as much. I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, sometimes, as I say, even in for teenagers, the very massive experience of we're all going to die, nothing means anything, and all of that can sometimes be their way of expressing symbolically their separation from their mother and the pain that's associated with that. I don't know if that adds anything, but
Yeah, it's actually a great point that it might be not the dramatic, great scale existential crisis, but the smallness of it. And to some extent, they coincide. It's even worse. The very idea, for example, that antidepressant works and you can just very easily, well, comparatively easy, it's hard to find to get prescription, but with just pill, you can become a happy human being. And it wasn't that much about existential crisis, but how it's fixable and how it's reducible to tiny things. And your one is exaggerating, talking about those more expanded stuff. And this is the difference between me and my teenager, because my teenager doesn't approve this kind of my what they call emo thinking, like it's too much, right? It's everything. But we both depressed in a different way, and I don't think I'm more depressed. Maybe I'm less depressed with all my, because for me it's like this great thing I'm going through, the existential agony. And for like it's even worse when it's so simple to fix it, but it's like it's the tiny thing that is also, because of its tininess, it's also very, and because of the particular traumatizing things was in relation to other people, like small instances, the smallness is also traumatic. And this agonizing, expanding it might be a way of like giving it this tragic hero status. It might be a
yes.
way of dealing with it. And my teenagers is deprived of, is more strong because they're deprived of this coping mechanism that I I employ as philosopher, you know, because it's like the great huge thing. It just, but we both suffering, I think, equally, you know, and both in a pathetic ways, like in opposite ways.
That's very good. I mean, it's funny because like it's that whole thing where somebody has this existential despair and then someone belittles it by saying, "Oh, did your mummy not let you suck your thumb when you were a child?" And suddenly the heroic, tragic kind of worldview that you have is reduced to not being able to suck your thumb. There's something even more tragic about that. Yeah, I
And
have to think about
precisely, if it's fixable, the very idea, it's like when you're in a dark room, that's how depression or anxiety feels. When you're in a dark room, you scream and there's nothing you can do to get out from this suffocating space. But if someone would tell you that all the time there was a door, which was obvious to everyone, you could get out of the room, it won't reduce your suffering. Like, because it's so simple, it's even worse, you know, that everybody knew about this door. You could just leave anytime, but you didn't know for some reason. The simplicity of it, it's also horrifying, of possibility of being happy, like tiny things that we need. So it's kind of even worse.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I gotta go.
Yeah.
And we have lots of great comments in chat, and the chat will be saved. There are no questions that much, but just comments. So I promise if I didn't read anything, I would read it later.
Brilliant.
Right.
Oh, well, listen, that was really fun. Thank you, Julie.
It's not supposed to be fun. That was really depressing. And I'm
Yes.
grateful for it. All right, everyone. It was great
It
to
was
see.
horribly depressing, and now we're all sad.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.